So I think it's good we start with Surah Al-Fatiha. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Maliki Yawm al-Din, إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين صدق الله العلي العظيم. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين ولعن الله ولا أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين آمين يا رب العالمين. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. عليكم منا جميعا سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار ولا جعل الله آخر الأحد منا لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. Peace be upon you, O Aba Abdullah, and upon the souls who have gathered in your courtyard. Upon you, from us all, is the peace of God forever, for as long as we remain and as long as night and day endure. And may God never make this our last pledge to visit you. Peace be upon Husayn and upon Ali, the son of Husayn, and upon the children of Husayn, and upon the companions of Husayn. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So this is the second in our series of sessions for these nights of Ashura and Arba'een on the subject of Tabyeen or clarification. As with our other sessions, such as those on patience, those on the lantern of the path, or those on the art of supplication, it is very strongly recommended that anyone consuming this at the very least review the previous sessions prior to consuming this. This is because of the nature of the discussion, the manner of the discourse really does require that each part build upon the one that came before, so as to avoid confusion, misunderstanding, or any invalid assumptions that can lead to what would actually be the antithesis of Tabyeen. While we do have a recap for each session, the recap is highly summarized, and to get the full nuance, the previous sessions will really need to be consumed, studied, and reflected upon. Also, once more, while these sessions can sometimes feel a little long and perhaps a little bit overwhelming, the content herein is extremely important, and I would ask that everyone please be patient and listen through to the end, and also follow through the previous and future sessions within this series. But if I can now get a salawat, we can move to the recap.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
So in the opening session of this series, we began by exploring the tragic reality that within 50 years of the passing of Prophet Muhammad, the Muslim community had strayed so far from the truth that it became complicit in the slaughter of his beloved grandson, Imam Husayn, and his companions. The session traced the roots of this catastrophe to a singular neglected duty, the Jihad of clarification, or Tabyeen. This failure to uphold truth allowed tyranny to masquerade as leadership and misguidance to parade as faith. We examined authenticated narrations from both the Sunni and Shia sources affirming the lofty station of Imam Hassan and Imam Husayn as Sayyiday Shababi Ahl al-Jannah, the leaders of the youth of paradise. Yet despite their known status, the Ummah permitted Yazid, a man who openly mocked revelation, to rule in their name. The words of Imam Husayn in his sermon in Mina condemned the silence of the scholars and the elites, warning that those who witness tyranny and do not resist it by word and or deed are complicit in the crime. The session also explored how Satan's ancient vow to lie in wait upon the straight path finds its fulfillment not merely through physical warfare, but through intellectual distortion, media manipulation, theological confusion. Various Quranic verses, such as those from Surah Al-A'raf, Surah Al-Kahf, warned of a people who believe they are doing good, while they are in fact straying away from the path of God. The session closed by establishing the central theme of the series, that Tabyeen is not optional. Rather, it is a divine trust, a duty upon the scholars, thinkers, and believers in every age. The pen, the pulpit, and the intellect are all weapons in this sacred battle. Just as Sayyidah Zainab upheld the truth in the courts of falsehood, so too must we. In the face of systematic distortion, be it political, theological, or historical, we are called to rise, not with weapons alone, but with speech, reason, ethics, and conviction. This is the jihad of our time. This is Tabyeen. Please give me a salawat and we continue.
اللهم صل
اللهم
على
صل على
محمد
محمد وآل
وآل
محمد.
محمد.
So today's session is about understanding Tabyeen. And the first point we have to look at is the nature of this soft war and the nature of what is the jihad of clarification. So among the most critical forms of jihad or struggle in our time is the jihad of the intellect and clarification. This is a struggle waged not with weapons, but with truth, insight, and resolve. It is a battle waged against distortion, misinformation, and the deliberate manipulation of public perception. Whenever an individual rises to protect society from confusion, from misinformation or deception, striving to awake awareness and illuminate the truth, such a person is engaged in a great form of jihad. Today, in addition to the enemy's overt military aggression that we see all around us, we face an even more dangerous and insidious campaign. And this is the soft war. Unlike conventional warfare, the software infiltrates minds and reshapes worldviews. It targets the moral compass and ideological resilience of nations and people. This war is fought through propaganda, through misinformation, and the deliberate inversion of truth and falsehood. In this war, the enemy employs two primary maneuvers. Firstly, severing the connection between the people and truth, undermining their moral and spiritual steadfastness. And secondly, reversing reality, portraying lies as truth and oppressors as victims. Through the immense machinery of global media, the enemy constructs narratives so forcefully and convincingly that even the informed may become confused. This is a war not of bullets, but of narratives, of presenting a world upside down, where the truth is condemned and falsehood is celebrated. Consider a striking example, for example. For years, a brutal bombing campaign was waged against the oppressed people of Yemen. Civilians had been targeted in their homes, in their schools, in hospitals, and on the streets, and even in weddings. An economic blockade had prevented even food and medicine and fuel from reaching there. This had been carried out by aggressive regimes within the region, within the West Asia region, with the full support of the United States and its allies in the collective West. And yet, when the Yemeni people responded with a single defensive operation, a deafening outcry emerged. This is terrorism, or this is aggression. And it's broadcast across all international platforms, echoed even by the United Nations, which often fails to condemn years of prior violence, but rushes to denounce a single act of self-defense. Such a response reveals the moral collapse of global institutions, where truth is not merely buried, it is reversed. Another case. The very government that holds the world's largest arsenal of nuclear weapons, and is the only one to have ever used them, that is, of course, the United States, now claims to be a global champion against weapons of mass destruction. Over 200,000 lives were extinguished in moments in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And yet it is this same nation that raises the slogan of peace and disarmament. The absurdity deepens. A regime that supports a ruler who murdered and dismembered a journalist with a bone saw, of course this is referring to Jamal Khashoggi, boldly proclaims itself a defender of human rights. It is this same regime that created, funded, and armed terrorist groups such as ISIS or Daesh, only to later declare war on them, using their presence as a pretext to establish military bases, to loot resources, and to justify the continued occupation of multiple sovereign lands. These are not theories. These are realities admitted by officials themselves. In another example, we see the relentless hostility towards the presence of resistance movements in countries like Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, etc. Yet in many cases, this presence was purely political or advisory. And where it was military, it was at the explicit request of legitimate governments. By contrast, the occupying powers established bases without consent, with no legal or moral justification. All of this is done while the truth is drowned in layers of distortion. What is illegitimate is declared legitimate. What is defensive is labeled terrorism. What is rooted in justice is portrayed as chaos and disorder. This is why the jihad of clarification is not optional. It is a divine duty. It is the struggle of the tongue, of the pen and the mind. And it is a response to the inversion of truth that defines our era. So in this era of accelerated communication, the tools of mass influence have been weaponized. The ability to shape perception has become a central theater of warfare. With calculated precision, the enemy manufactures illusions, presenting falsehood as noble resistance and vilifying truth as extremism. This strategy is not merely theoretical. It is deeply embedded in historical and contemporary events. One such example is the systematic attempt to revise and sanitize the image of corrupt regimes. And the example I will use is, for example, the Pahlavi regime in Iran. In recent years, some people have sought to repaint the brutalities and failures of that period, the time when the Pahlavis ran Iran, when they were essentially a proxy of the United States. Some people have sought to repaint these brutalities and failures of that period as being mere exaggerations or even fabrications. They ask, was it really that bad? Or why did the revolution even take place? Such questions are not seeded from objective curiosity, but from a deliberate effort to cast doubt upon the moral legitimacy of the Islamic awakening, the global Islamic awakening that followed and that continues to this day. Efforts have even been made to resurrect the reputation of figures such as Hoveyda and Pahlavi himself, people whose governance was steeped in foreign dependency, in elitist corruption and subservience to colonial powers. Despite attempts to glorify their image, even the most sympathetic accounts cannot avoid acknowledging their betrayals. This whitewashing of history is part of a larger movement to invalidate the very foundations of the Islamic Revolution and to implant doubts in the heart of those who did not live through it. Similarly, we are witness to an intensifying media war, akin to the early days of the 8-year imposed war against the fledgling Islamic Revolution. At that time, the defenders of the land of Iran lacked even the most basic weapons. They had no RPGs, no anti-tank equipment, no anti-aircraft, all of this. They were facing a huge and massive mechanized army that was very well equipped. And yet, by the grace of God, they prevailed. Today, the battle is just as fierce. but the weapons are different. It is a battle not of tanks and trenches, but of narratives, perception, and morale. The enemy possesses an arsenal of media tools, platforms, bots, and influencers. Their objective is not merely territorial, rather, it is psychological. It is to make the oppressed feel weak, feel defeated, and feel incapable of standing. They do not stop at external attacks, they work from within, planting despair and resignation. They flood the public psyche with phrases like, "That's impossible. There's no point. We can't succeed." These are not casual expressions. These are psychological weapons, sapping the willpower out of societies from the inside out. At such times, the obligation to clarify becomes urgent. Clarification is not just about countering lies. It is about restoring confidence, rekindling purpose, and reaffirming identity. Without clarification, people begin to internalize these distortions. They begin to question what they once knew. This is the subtle poison of psychological warfare. It kills not the body, but it kills the soul. And in fact, the Quran has warned against this passivity. In Surah Al-Imran, the chapter of the family of Imran, third chapter of the Quran, verse 187, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, "When God made a covenant with those who were given the book, you shall surely clarify it for the people and not conceal it." This command is not confined to the scholars of old. It is a living command, binding upon all who possess knowledge and insight in the face of distortions. Please give me a salawat and we proceed.
اللهم صل على
اللهم صل على
محمد
سيدنا
وآل
محمد
محمد.
وآل محمد.
So the campaign of distortion does not merely target political memory or historical events. It seeks to disrupt clarity, to entangle minds in confusion, and to blur the lines between truth and falsehood. In such moments, the greatest danger is fitna or sedition, a state in which it becomes difficult to distinguish friend from foe, sincerity from deception, and guidance from misguidance. Sedition clouds the intellect. It breeds hesitation. It forces the believer to doubt their own moral compass. This is why clarification is not a secondary virtue. It is the remedy to fitna. In the words of the commander of the faithful, Imam Ali, he says, and this is from Nahj al-Balagha, and as with all of these sessions, there are extensive citations and footnotes throughout the write-up. So Imam Ali says, "The beginning of the occurrence of seditions is desires that are followed and rulings that are innovated. Opposed to the Book of God, people assist one another upon these, even though they oppose the religion of God." Imam Ali continues, "Had falsehood been unmixed, it would not be hidden from the seekers of truth. Had truth been pure and free of falsehood, those who hate it would be silenced. But a portion is taken from here and another from there. Truth and falsehood are mixed. In such a case, Satan dominates those who follow him." This mixing is the hallmark of our age. Truth is not denied, rather it is diluted. Falsehood is not always bold, but it is concealed with familiar words and noble slogans. So what then is the remedy to such confusion? The answer lies in clear, confident, and principled clarification. In moments where movements emerge bearing misleading slogans, or when elections, protests, or political shifts create uncertainty, it becomes the obligation of the thinking elite to set the record straight. Silence at such times is not neutrality, rather it is complicity. Ambiguity aids the enemy. Clarification hinders the advance of falsehood, while confusion furnishes it with cover. Every person of insight has a duty, especially those whose words carry weight. For example, scholars, speakers, educators, and public figures. They must draw clear boundaries between truth and error. They must speak out against falsehood, even if it wears the garb of legitimacy. And they must illuminate murky discourse with Quranic light and historical perspective. This duty transcends partisanship. It is not the task of one political camp or one ideology. In the Islamic framework, everyone is accountable. Every group, especially those within positions of influence, must declare their stance. Are you aligned with the oppressors or are you against them? Do you stand with the arrogant powers of the world or are you in disassociation from them? To remain silent in times of confusion is to allow deception to deepen. The enemy thrives in the smoke-filled arenas of obscurity, where truth is not outright denied, but quietly suffocated. Therefore, as believers, as thinkers, as inheritors of the Quranic call to bear witness to truth, we must never tire of clarification. It is not only a defense, it is a form of jihad, and one that is desperately needed in this age of engineered confusion. Please give me a salawat and we can proceed to looking at clarification in Islamic history from the Prophet to Imam Ali.
اللهم صل على
اللهم صل
على
على
محمد
محمد
وآل محمد
وآل
وعجل
محمد.
So clarification is not simply a modern necessity. It is actually a divine sunnah, exemplified in the lives of the prophets and the imams. The Quran itself bears witness to moments when the Prophet Muhammad was commanded to clarify, even when doing so would invite slander or social backlash. One such instance is the episode involving Zayd ibn Haritha and Zaynab bint Jahsh. The Prophet was commanded to marry her after her divorce from Zayd, who was a former slave and the adopted son of the messenger. This was in order to break an unjust social custom that equated adoption with biological lineage. This caused murmurs and accusations among the people, yet God instructed the Prophet to proceed and clarify the divine wisdom behind the action. And this is in Quran in Surah Ahzab, the chapter of the Confederates, 33rd chapter of the Quran, verse number 38, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, "There is no blame on the Prophet concerning what God has ordained for him. Such has been God's way with those who passed earlier, and God's command is bound to be fulfilled." In this instance, the Prophet did not retreat from his duty to clarify a misunderstood matter, even though it was socially sensitive. He became a living sacrifice for truth, and God defended him, making the reality clear to all. This model of proactive clarification is fundamental to Islamic guidance. The Imams continued this legacy. During the Caliphate of Imam Ali, the greatest challenges he faced were not from open disbelievers, but from those who claimed Islam, those who prayed and spoke the language of faith, yet had deviated from the truth. This was no simple test. Unlike the early battles of Islam, where the lines were visibly drawn between Muslims and idolaters, the trials of Imam Ali were marked by ambiguity and internal sedition. Many of those who opposed him had once stood beside the Prophet. Some were companions who were respected and recognized. This made the situation immensely difficult. Even notable figures like Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, praised for his piety and knowledge, struggled to see clearly during the turmoil of Siffin. He is reported to have said to Imam Ali, "O Commander of the Faithful, we are in doubt regarding this battle, despite our knowledge of your virtue. Such doubt among the elites is deeply corrosive. It eats away at the clarity of truth and weakens the resolve of a righteous movement, just like termites undermining the very pillars of a just society. As the political atmosphere became increasingly clouded, the burden of clarification fell on companions like Ammar ibn Yasir. His words and interventions were instrumental in exposing falsehood and guiding the hesitant. Yet by the time of Imam Hassan, even this clarity had diminished. The murkiness had thickened, the lines had blurred further. Sedition had triumphed over discernment. And this too was foreseen by Imam Ali, where he says in Nahj al-Balagha, a portion is taken from here and another from there. Truth and falsehood are mixed. In such a case, Satan dominates his friends, and only those are saved upon whom God has bestowed his grace. In contrast, at the time of the Prophet, clarity was often easier. The polytheists were open enemies. Their crimes were known. Their enmity was very clear. The Muslims who had emigrated, the Muhajirun, remembered who had beaten them, who had imprisoned them and usurped their properties. Even the conspiracies of the various Jewish tribes in Medina, for example, like Banu Qurayza, were exposed. And when justice was meted out, no one expressed hesitation, for the battlefield was illuminated. But in the age of internal sedition, clarity fades, slogans are co-opted, believers turn against each other. The true challenge of Imam Ali's time, and likewise our own time, is to discern within the fog, to remain anchored in revelation and insight, and to carry out the duty of clarification, regardless of how murky the terrain becomes. Can I have a salawat and we can start looking at lessons from history and the role of strategic propagation?
اللهم صل على
صل
محمد
على محمد
وآل محمد.
So the pattern of internal sedition and confusion witnessed during the time of Imam Ali and later intensified during the era of Imam Hassan was not merely the result of emotional unrest or political intrigue. It was the outcome of a systematic failure in political and theological analysis. Many sincere Muslims, though committed in worship and faith, lacked the clarity and discernment required to navigate complex crises. They hesitated, they wavered, or they were swayed by deceptive arguments. In studying the 5 years of Imam Ali's governance, one concludes that the most critical factor behind the failures and setbacks was not a lack of piety, but a weakness in insight and analysis. Had this clarity been present, many who fought on the wrong side of history might have stood in the ranks of truth. Instead, they followed misplaced loyalties, tribal impulses, or superficial slogans, thinking they fought for righteousness, when in fact they stood against the wali of God. This is the same danger. This is the same danger that confronts us today. The forces of falsehood often clothe themselves in religious language, adopting the very terminology of the righteous, while emptying it of its true meaning. In such an environment, clarification is no longer just a recommendation. It is a survival imperative. But clarification alone is not enough. It must be part of a strategic program of propagation, one that understands the needs of the time, speaks the language of the people, and anticipates the distortions that are likely to arise. This cannot be the work of lone individuals operating in isolation. It requires planning, collective insight, an understanding of the audience, and a unified narrative rooted in divine guidance. Indeed, in Islamic history, the most intense efforts of the Prophet were not spent only on open enemies, but rather on hypocrites and internal saboteurs. Likewise, Imam Ali's energies were consumed in fighting those who claimed to uphold Islam, yet opposed its divine leadership. These were not merely political adversaries. They were ideological distorters, and their legacy continues to poison the Muslim world today. At the time of the Battle of Badr, the truth was manifest. The lines were very clear. The enemy was openly hostile. But the true trial lies in those moments when the enemy claims to be your brother, when slogans are shared, the attire is the same, but the soul has deviated. The worst calamity is not external pressure, but internal erosion. When Muslims lose clarity, they begin to question the obvious. They become paralyzed with doubt. That is why strategic, consistent, and tailored propagation must be part of any Islamic revival. The duty of those on the pulpits, in the seminaries, and in the fields of education is to speak in a way that clarifies, not confuses, to simplify without diluting, to awaken without provoking fitna or sedition. Not everyone is equipped to do this. Some may falter, some may err, maybe in their tone or in their substance. That is why it must be the task of organized, conscious, and God-fearing groups to take on this mission very seriously. God willing, this task can and must be fulfilled. Now, the modern arena is a place where one can do clarification in the face of global propaganda. Today, the need for clarification is no less urgent than it was in the time of the Imams. The battlefield, however, has shifted. It is no longer defined solely by armies and empires, but rather by ideological warfare, digital distortion, and psychological infiltration. The enemy has realized that to weaken a nation, to weaken a people, it is not always necessary to destroy its infrastructure. One needs to only confuse its people, distort their beliefs, erode their trust in their values, and shatter their hope. This is the real objective of modern propaganda. Through satellite channels, online platforms, social media influencers, entertainment narratives, and even educational institutions, a new form of colonization is underway. A colonization of the mind. And who are the primary targets? Not the elders, nor the firmly grounded scholars. It is the minds of the youth that are most aggressively pursued. If the younger generation can be alienated from their faith, divorced from their identity, and made to feel ashamed of their history, then the enemy has no need to fight further. A generation that doubts itself will never resist. This is the goal behind the barrage of distortions, to present oppression as progress, submission to global hegemony as modernity, and resistance to injustice as extremism. They wish to convince the Muslim Ummah that its principles are outdated, its scriptures irrelevant, and its scholars obsolete. This is not mere criticism. It is a coordinated campaign to hollow out the spiritual and intellectual core of Islamic civilization. Please give me a salawat and we continue.
اللهم صل على
اللهم
محمد
صل على محمد
وآل محمد.
Parallel to things like sanctions, political pressure, there is the distortion of realities. These are realities that are both domestic and international. Every weakness within a Muslim country is magnified 100-fold, while every success is silenced. Any internal voice that echoes the enemy's narrative is amplified and celebrated by the foreign media. If someone speaks against their own nation's scholars, against their own nation's martyrs or values, they are instantly embraced by platforms hostile to Islam. On the other hand, anyone who speaks of resistance, of self-reliance, or of spiritual dignity is labeled as dangerous or regressive. The result is a strategic demoralization of the masses, especially the youth. They are made to feel as though their society is hopeless, that their future is bleak, and that their values are irrelevant. Interestingly, the Quran warns us of this tactic. In describing the enemies of divine truth, it says, and this is from Surah Al-Hajj, the chapter of the pilgrimage, 22nd chapter of the Quran, verse number 73. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, if the fly snatches away anything from them, they cannot retrieve it from it. Weak is the seeker, and weak the sought. Such is the state of those who chase illusion and abandon truth. But this campaign of distortion is not only about weakening morale. It also seeks to pressure populations into false solutions. It whispers, if you wish to be free from sanctions, you must compromise with the oppressor. If you want relief, you must surrender. This is not relief. This is capitulation. It is the surrender of one's divine duty in exchange for fleeting convenience. However, by the grace of God, the majority of the Ummah remain steadfast. The voices of truth have not been silenced, and the banner of clarity has not fallen. But this state of resilience must not breed complacency. If the movement of distortion gains ground, it will not only damage perceptions, it will weaken determination. And if determination is lost, then both resistance and revival are placed in jeopardy. That is why, if the campaign of distortion is defeated, then, by the will of God, any campaign of sanctions will also collapse. And over here, when I talk about sanctions, yes, there is an inference to talking about Iran, because the basis for our sessions are Imam Khamenei's sessions on Tabyeen. But there are sanctions of different types that happen across to Muslims everywhere, and people who speak the truth everywhere across the world, especially in the collective West. This is because this is not just a battle of information. It is rather a battle of wills. And when the will of the believers is firm, then the falsehood of the arrogant shall crumble. Quran is testimony to this. In Surah Anfal, the chapter of the spoils of war, 8th chapter of Quran, verse number 65, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, if there be 20 patient ones amongst you, they shall overcome 200. Please give me a salawat and we look at the next section, which is the final responsibility, clarification as the engine of revival.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
So clarification is not merely a defensive measure. It is the engine of revival. It awakens the heedless, emboldens the faithful, and erects barriers against fitna before it spreads. At its core, clarification is about reasserting the primacy of truth in an age that seeks to bury it under distraction, distortion, and doubt. It is also a direct continuation of the Quranic instruction to the Prophet Muhammad. And this is from Surah Al-Ra'd, the chapter of thunder, 13th chapter of Quran, verse number 40. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tells Prophet Muhammad, your duty is only to communicate, and ours is the reckoning, meaning Allah's is the reckoning. Our obligation is not to guarantee outcomes, but to fulfill the trust of tabligh or conveyance, to clarify the path of God, so that no one is misled by the slogans of the enemy or the deceit of the hypocrites. This responsibility belongs to everyone, especially those entrusted with influence. those who educate, those who preach, those who write, and those who organize. A scholar who remains silent in the face of confusion bears part of the blame. A teacher who permits distortions to fester in young minds is complicit. A speaker who seeks popularity at the expense of truth is not just failing to clarify, they are helping to obscure. Now, this does not mean stirring internal conflict or division. Clarification must never descend into provocation or partisan squabbles. It must be rooted in insight and delivered with wisdom, and oriented towards unity around divine principles, not personalities or factions. Indeed, the Islamic revolution itself was built on the method of clarification. And it succeeded not through emotional agitation or political trickery, but through clear and moral reasoning. It outmaneuvered ideologies like Marxism by offering a coherent, truthful alternative grounded in revelation. Wherever it stumbled, it was not due to a failure of spirit, but a failure to maintain clarity in discourse and direction. Today, as dialectic materialism returns in new guises, as consumerism and self-indulgence seduce hearts, as doubt is spread under the mask of intellectualism, clarification remains our tool, our weapon, and our obligation. And this duty is not limited to the classroom or the minbar, the pulpit. It must extend into the media, where narratives are shaped, the universities, where worldviews are formed, the homes, where values are transmitted, and the streets, where opinions are circulated. Every Muslim who witnesses confusion must offer clarity. Every person who hears a falsehood must refute it with reason and respect. Every believer who sees sedition taking root must uproot it with courage and conviction. And this is also a Quranic edict. In Surah al-Baqarah, the chapter of the cow, second chapter of the Quran, verse 283, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, "Do not conceal the testimony. Whoever conceals it, his heart is indeed sinful." This is why the remembrance of great struggles, like the Islamic Revolution, the defense of Palestine, or the sacrifices of the martyrs, must not be allowed to fade. If the truth is not repeated, it will be replaced by fiction. If the names of the righteous are not honored, they will be buried beneath the slogans of the corrupt. We must ask ourselves, why has the legacy of Karbala endured for over 1300 years? Because the Ummah did not stop narrating it. The Ummah did not cease to mourn it and did not allow it to be forgotten. Were it not for the annual revival of Ashura that we are commemorating ourselves, it might have been reduced to a marginal footnote of history. In the same way, the realities of our age, the struggles, the betrayals, the divine victories must be preserved and transmitted through clarification. Not once, not annually, but constantly and coherently. The Quran commands repetition. Our prayers, our remembrance, our reading of the book are all grounded in repetition for remembrance, for reinforcement, and for renewal. So too must be our political and spiritual clarity. Let every one of us then become a bearer of this responsibility. Let us refuse to remain silent, even when silence is safer. Let us refuse to remain neutral, even when neutrality appears respectable. Let us speak, clarify, and stand, so that the enemy is confused and not the believer. In Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah An-Nisa, the chapter of the women, fourth chapter of the Quran, verse 45, If they all march out against you, they will do so in scattered groups, and God is sufficient as a guardian, and God is sufficient as a helper. Please give me a loud salawat and we move to the conclusion.
اللهم صل على
اللهم صل على
محمد
محمد
وآل محمد.
So let us make a clarion call in this, the age of confusion. So in this session, we have journeyed through the many dimensions of the Jihad of Tabyeen or clarification, a duty that transcends time, geography, and circumstance. We have seen that in every age of fitna, from the life of the Prophet Muhammad to the era of Imam Ali, the victory of truth was never solely dependent on force of arms, but rather on clarity of vision, strength of word, and integrity of purpose. The enemies of Islam no longer fight only with bullets and bombs. They wage war through distortion, demoralization, and distraction. Their goal is not just to conquer lands, but to conquer minds. And so, we are called to respond, not with confusion, not with silence, but with the sharp, unwavering sword of clarification. Clarification is not noise, it is light. It is the act of lifting the fog, of drawing firm lines between right and wrong, and of denying the enemy the cover of ambiguity. It requires insight, preparation, patience, and unity. It is a collective obligation, especially for those who carry influence over hearts and minds. If we understand this duty and we rise to fulfill it, whether in our words, in our writings, in our sermons, or even in our conversations, then we become part of a noble lineage, the bearers of divine testimony in an age of deceit. And as God reminds us, and this is from Surah Al-Imran, the chapter of the family of Imran, third chapter of the Quran, verse 104. Let there be among you a group who invite to good, enjoin what is right, and forbid what is wrong. It is they who shall be successful. May we be amongst them. May our voices be clear, may our intentions be pure, and our mission unwavering. And may God bless the efforts of all who strive to illuminate truth in a world of shadows. Please give me a salawat and we move to the supplication eulogy titled This is Karbala.
اللهم صل على
اللهم صل على محمد
وآل
وآل
محمد.
محمد.
So this is the supplication eulogy for the second night, and its title is This is Karbala. In his name, the Lord of the martyrs and the truthful. O God, send your blessings upon Muhammad and the family of Muhammad. O God, O the one who guided Noah in the storm, who cooled the fire for Abraham, who parted the sea for Moses, why then did you not part the sands for Husayn? O my Lord, this is the day his blessed feet touched the soil of Karbala. He looked upon that land with knowing eyes. He paused and said, here is the place where our blood shall be spilt. Here will our women be taken captive. Here will my children cry, and the swords will fall upon us. What heart could carry the burden you bore, to see the place of your own slaughter and walk into it, not as a prisoner, but as a lover, as one who chose death to give life to the souls of men? O God, this is the land you call blessed, by the blood that would fall upon it. This is the land of the covenant, the place where heaven bent down to kiss the earth, but the people turned their backs. I bear witness you established the prayer, you gave charity, you enjoined good, and you forbade evil. Yet they surrounded you, not with reverence, but with arrows, with lances, and with siege. O beloved of the messenger, as you descended from your steed, you surveyed the land. You ordered tents to be pitched. You gave the command, not of a warlord, but of the final prophet's grandson, a guide, a father, a servant of the truth. And you named the place Karbin wa Bala, karb and bala, grief and trial. O my Imam, was it for us that you endured this? Was it so that the prayer would remain pure, that you gave your head and heart to the sword? O God, what did the world do to your saint? He came with peace, but they came with poison. He came with the Quran, but they came with thirst. He came with his family, but they came with armies. And now the camp is settled. The days are numbered. The angels descend each night to behold the greatest sacrifice ever offered. O my Lord, do not let us look upon Karbala as a tale of the past. Let our hearts arrive there too with our Imam. Let our souls camp with him. Let our bodies stand between his family and harm. And if we cannot, then let our grief be sincere. Let our tears be our allegiance. Let our mourning be our repentance. And let our love be our proof. O God, make my station and remembrance in Karbala, even if only through dua and tears. And grant me his visitation in this world and his intercession in the hereafter. Tonight, we do not yet mourn your martyrdom. Tonight, we pitch the tents. We fill the water skins. We prepare the prayer mats. We prepare to clarify. We prepare to resist. But already, our hearts are heavy with the knowledge of what is to come. And we say, this is Karbala. This is where the heavens shall weep. And the cry of the lovers resound. Labbayka ya Husayn. We are here, our Husayn. وآخر الدعوان عن الحمد لله رب العالمين والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.